I mean, in some sense, the big problem in the United States is that the last 40 years, or really since the 1980s, you've had this expansion of globalization, you've had economic growth, you've had increased prosperity, but it has not been common prosperity, it has not been shared. And people, working class people, people without a college education have not benefited at all. And that's provided the social base for, Make America Great and President Trump. You still see that innovative kind of capacity in the United States. You still see that technological dynamism, and I think at the moment I would say the institutional basis of that is kind of more enduring than it is in China. But the institutional basis of that is being severely challenged in the United States at the moment. The rule of law is being challenged, democracy is being challenged. The capacity of the state is being challenged.
What's your prediction of the U.S. economy?
I don't know. It's a very uncertain moment. It's very hard to know how this is going to pan out. I think it all depends now on whether Americans are willing, to defend their institutions. I think in the past they have been. You could look at moments in the 19th century. President Biden, and not without good reason, made this comparison to the Gilded Age when he left office. I think that was exactly right. You could think about the 1930s also. So there have been moments in the past where US institutions have been severely challenged, and we're at that moment now, and it's for citizens to stand up and fight for their institutions, fight for the institutions that actually, ironically enough, has made a United States so prosperous and so successful, and that's definitely under threat at the moment.
So, since you talk about the current situation with the Trump administration, Trump himself imposed another tariffs on steels and aluminum, Canada, and multiple countries.
Yeah.
How do you see his policy on tariffs? Will that make America great?
I think that's just bad economic policy. That doesn't worry me, I'm much more concerned about the institutional problems, about the destruction of the state, the deinstitutionalization of the state, the personalization, the privatization of the state to President Trump and his cronies and Elon Musk. For me, that's much, much more of a concern. The threat to invade and annex Greenland and Panama, that's a threat to the whole world order, it seems to me. Tariffs is a bad economic policy. I can live with bad economic policy. President Trump had tariffs before, by the way, in his first administration, and so did President Biden. So, is that bad for the world economy? Sure. But I think we're talking about something much bigger here.
Do you see the shift of the public opinion in America that gradually will destroy this institution that currently exists?
I don't think this is really about public opinion. I don't think people understood what was going to happen. President Trump did not announce most of these things. He didn't say he was going to do them. So a lot of things that are happening, which I hope are going to be very surprising to his constituents. Of course, if you watch Fox News, you'll see that they're completely misrepresenting what's going on at the moment. So whether this actually gets through to people, I don't know, but I think it's going to have disastrous economic consequences, and I think that will get through to people. So I don't think people voted for this, to be honest with you.
It's not very well.
It was not explained to them. President Trump ran on a bunch of very kind of visceral issues. On some of those, of course, he's delivering, this anti-diversity kind of set of issues. Yes, those things are very visceral for conservative people in the United States, for white men in the United States. So he is delivering on those issues, so those he did talk about during the campaign, but he didn't talk about firing basically federal workers or, cutting, he's going to start cutting many expending programs that actually benefit, poor people in the United States who did vote for him, and he was not advertising that. He's deporting migrants. Again, I can live with that. I think that's obviously, it's very awful from a humanitarian perspective for those people, but that doesn't threaten the institutions in the way many of his other initiatives do.
Last question, I'm also curious, how do you see the current China-US relations? If it were to get, the tension get escalated, how would that impact it?
Well, I'm not an expert on that. I suspect China doesn't really know how to deal with this either. They're waiting to see if things are for real or whether they're a bargaining strategy. Like that, some people have this narrative about President Trump that you don't know what's for real and what's a negotiating tactic. So I expect everybody is a little bit waiting to see what's happening with that. But Justin Trudeau, for example, the Prime Minister in Canada, certainly thinks that the threat to annex Canada is for real, and the Prime Minister of Denmark seemed to believe that President Trump talking about taking Greenland was for real. So how does that affect the Chinese exactly? No, tariffs. China exports many things to other countries. They then export them to the United States. So you can get around these things with different sorts of strategies, I would think.
So for the future, if the situation gets more escalated, do you think it's probably the world is okay? For the future of the world, if these two big countries now get along well?
They don't get along well.
Yeah, if these two countries are not getting along well.
I think, the United States has an interest in China prospering. Elon Musk has an interest in China prospering. The world has become much more affluent in the last 30 or 40 years because of Chinese economic growth. That's raised millions of Chinese people out of poverty, and it's had enormously positive effects elsewhere. And maybe it's also created this alternative model that we were discussing earlier. I'm skeptical, but it's interesting, And one thing I see in Africa, for example, is the way that Chinese people interact with Africans is very different from the way Westerners interact with Africans. Westerners, we love to tell Africans what to do. You should be more like us. We tell them they're corrupt and they're incompetent and stuff. Chinese people are much less like that. Chinese people don't come and say, no, you should be like us. You should do things like us. It's a much more level playing field, interestingly enough, although China's very big and powerful. Like what I see is that many African elites, they prefer to interact with Chinese people because they understand what's at stake, and they're not being patronized, So there's many interesting implications of this Chinese development experience. So I think the whole world collectively needs China to flourish. So hopefully, sanity will reign.
Have you visited China before?
Yes.
Which city?
No, I've been, mostly I've been to conferences and as a tourist, and I have many Chinese friends in academia. But I've never done serious research in China. Yeah.
Is it Shanghai?
Shanghai. I was just in Shanghai and Hong Kong in January. I was at a conference in Shanghai, and then I gave lectures at Hong Kong University.